The Pretoria High Court has set aside the decision by President Cyril Ramaphosa to recognize King Misuzulu kaZwelithini as the leader of the Amazulu nation. 2 applications for review were brought by the late king's brother, that's Prince Mbonisi Zulu, as well as the half-brother of King Misuzulu, Prince Simakade Zulu. The applications were not made to determine who the heir to the throne is, but sought relief to review and set aside the meeting held on the 14th of May back in 2021, where the heir to the throne was appointed. Let's unpack this now. Bring in Professor Bhedlindaba Velaphi Mkhize, who's the founder of the Umsamo Institute, who joins us via our video link this morning. And Prof, it's lovely to get your insights on these issues. Thanks as always for making time. I wonder as a start how consequential you reckon this ruling is, or is it just about fixing a procedural flaw?
Thank you very much, and Ayanda, and good morning. Even though I couldn't hear your question, well, could you please repeat it for me?
No problem. I was hoping as a start that you could help us place just how consequential this ruling is, because at least to me it appears it's just about altering a procedural flaw more than anything else.
Yes, you see, first of all here, Ayanda, I think to the viewers as well, we have to differentiate 2 things here. The first one is that, you see, the king is not appointed but the king is born, depending also on the tradition and also the customs of that particular a nation. And also on the other side, yes, acknowledging the fact that we are actually living in what we call today in a democratic country, where the government also must be part of that, because you can't be a king just in a vacuum. What is happening here? The court hasn't ruled out that Misuzulu is not a king, but the court says in the meetings which were held, it looked as if there was some sort of not following certain procedures according to the Traditional Act of 2019, if I'm not mistaken, and that we don't know what are the loopholes there, and that is why they say somehow a committee, if I'm not mistaken, should be appointed in order to investigate that and see where the flaws happened and also is it that was never fulfilled. Because the king actually is appointed, is paid by birth, and as we know, Misuzulu, how actually was actually put into the reign. And therefore, the government automatically has to issue a letter. Maybe therefore, the court saying, according to that letter, something or something was not out, and therefore, he is a person that maybe the government must recognize at this point in time, but he remains a king.
Let me apologize to our viewers there. Our connection to you, Prof, isn't the best, but hopefully it holds stable throughout the course of our discussion. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you also reckon that, there isn't a likelihood that there will be a different outcome, even if this committee is reconstituted and all boxes, if you like, are ticked, at least as prescribed by that act. That's the Traditional and Khoisan Leadership Act of 2019.
Yes, definitely. To me, yes, act must be there. The Traditional and the Khoisan Act must be there. Yes, it's good for the country. But you see, I don't see anything ridiculous happening in this issue, because even the KwaZulu council will say, look, according to us, the king comes from a wife whose lobolo was paid by the nation, and therefore he qualifies. And they will revisit Simakade's, how was he born, and who was his mother, and also according to the tradition of the Zulus, is he a qualifying person as per that, not as per the Act of 2019? So those are the kinds of things. So as I'm sitting here at this point in time, I think this is going to take time, but I don't see anything happening in future which will change the current king to be the king.
Interesting you mentioned that you reckon this might be protracted. The obvious question that comes up is, what kind of bearing you think that's going to have on King Misuzulu's tenure, for lack of a better term, especially if this continues to hang in the balance, at least in the eyes of some people?
I think it's to be very difficult for him, and also particularly amongst his other Abantwana, and also at Newzroom, because we must remember that even though the court gave this ruling, there was also the infighting in the Umzungulu amongst the Abantwana and so on. So maybe that is going to intensify now because of this action which has actually happened. And other Abantwana who are not interested in this fight, they might actually put more pressure, which will give more pressure to him, of which it will actually make him not to be able to perform some of his duties and also to do some of his work. And also on the other side, what I'm scared of is that, his salary is coming from the government and most of the resources from the government. Now, if the court rules this, maybe the government will say, okay, let's hold back some of the resources, and also which will make some of the things to be very difficult for him to perform.
Yeah. One wonders, though, if there isn't a way to expedite the process, Prof., especially because, as you've mentioned, as far as you're concerned, this is a far-gone conclusion. It's just about altering some of those constitutional requirements so that they make sense in the books of the government, so to speak. If that's the only task, really, like the only substantial task that needs to be undertaken here, surely there's a way to speed it up.
Definitely. You see, unfortunately, I'm not a legal expert, and I haven't read this act. Should I have read it, I would easily pinpoint it and say, look, this is what actually they must fix. But what I actually would advise is that even if that committee gets appointed, let it be composed of very objective people who will know all the customary laws and the customs, not only of the Zulu nation, but of all our African people in South Africa, because this actually, history mustn't repeat itself, because this kind of a thing might happen also in another nation, maybe Venda Kings or Pedi King or whatever, whatever the case may be. So expedite this, I think, they must try to appoint a committee which is has got good knowledge of the customs and everything, and also advise the government and advise the president and say, look, this is the kind of and therefore how do we correct it? But not to say that the discovery of that must actually make the king to sit down. So that would be a disaster to me. So that would be the creation of bad history in our time.
Sure. Interesting times it is indeed. Professor Velaphi Mkhize, as always, thanks very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it here on the AM Report. Professor Mkhize is the founder of the Umsamo Institute.